Welcome to episode 64 of the 3 Fear podcast. Doris Bither was a single mother with 4 children when her hauntings began. Though many believe her encounters with the supernatural started much earlier. Not much is known about her childhood except that she was raised in an upper middle class family by 2 alcoholic parents. Some say she suffered from childhood abuse at their hands. During her teenage years, Doris had a major fallout with her family, possibly because she had started practicing seances and was also dabbling in occult. And because she was trying all these things, especially the Ouija board, her parents were disgusted by her behavior and finally decided to kick her out. Doris often turned to drinking, which made her life unstable. She married several times, but each time her marriage ended in a toxic divorce. Despite all these challenges, she gave birth to 4 children, each with a different father. Eventually, Doris and her children moved to a rough neighborhood in Culver City, California. The children were between the ages of 6 and 16. Their house was small and in poor condition, but they tried to make their lives as normal as possible. However, strange and paranormal activities soon disrupted their lives, particularly targeting Doris, preventing them from having a simple, happy life. One late night, an old woman knocked on their front door. Doris answered and noticed that the woman had a strange look on her face. Doris had never seen her before and was puzzled as to why this lady was there so late at night. The old woman, appearing to be around 70 or 80 years old, might have been lost. At least, that's what Doris thought. As she greeted the old woman at her door, the woman quickly cut her off and said that she had lived in this house decades ago as a little girl. She explained that her parents had bought the house, and as she grew up, she noticed strange occurrences, like there would be flickering lights, moving objects. Although she didn't provide much detail, she was convinced that something evil was there in that house, and she wanted Doris to leave this house immediately because she didn't want Doris to go through what she went through. After delivering her warning, the old woman walked off into the darkness and vanished like a ghost. Doris wanted to ask her more questions, but the woman was gone. At first, Doris dismissed this warning, thinking that maybe the old lady was delusional. She wondered if the old lady was just strung out, or maybe she escaped a mental facility. However, soon enough, the old lady's warning would prove to be true. Doris began experiencing paranormal activity in a suburban house. Objects would shift on their own, doors started creaking open at night, and even physical attacks by invisible entities. Hello and welcome to the 3 Fear podcast. I'm your host Nikita, and I'm here to take you on a dark and twisted journey through the unknown. Here we talk about all things paranormal, occult, hauntings, serial killers, demonic possessions, cults, and so much more. Join me as we go through these mysterious stories that are sure to keep you up at night. Let's get started. As a single mother with no other family to turn to, Doris kept these experiences to herself. She didn't want to tell other people because she was afraid that if she did, then people would think that she's crazy. She was also scared that if people thought she was crazy, they would take her kids away. But luck was on her side. In August of 1974, she was in a bookshop with a friend. While browsing, she overheard 2 men discussing their interest in paranormal investigations. One of the men was Cary Gaynor, a budding paranormal investigator. Doris approached him and shared her story about the haunted house and the strange old lady. She asked Cary to help her identify the source of the disturbances. Now there are many different sources, so in some sources it is said that Doris was not the one who met these paranormal investigators, but it was her friend who met them and then spoke on behalf of her. But majority of the sources talk about Doris going and meeting the investigators. So that's what I'm going with in this episode. Now the two investigators, Barry Taff and Cary Gaynor, worked at the University of California in Los Angeles. Barry Taff holds a doctorate in psychopsychology. Cary Gaynor, on the other hand, has a degree in philosophy. Cary took her name and phone number, promising to be in contact. Not long after, Cary reached out to his associate Barry Taff, a parapsychologist with a keen interest in the paranormal. Together, they scheduled a meeting with Doris on August 22, 1974. Cary and Barry arrived at Doris's small house on Braddock Street in Culver City. The house was in such poor condition that it had been condemned twice by the city. Yet Doris had managed to make it her home. As they began interviewing her, they noticed that Doris was not ready to talk. Even though she was the one who called them and wanted their help, she seemed uncomfortable with even the simplest of questions, such as her name and her family history. When asked about her medical history, she completely avoided the question. It was as if answering all this was too painful for her. After 2 hours of questioning her and Doris not answering anything, the investigators decided to restart. And suddenly, Doris broke down in tears, crying and confessing that she was a victim of childhood abuse, and that's why she also had a severe drinking problem. Soon after this, she started talking about how she had terrifying experiences in this house, and from the past few months, she had been assaulted by invisible entities and a horrific rape by 3 ghosts. Doris claimed that 2 of the ghosts held her down while the third one assaulted her. She even showed the bruises on her inner thighs. Shocked by her story, Cary and Barry initially thought that Doris might be lying. They did meet a lot of people before, and many of the people who were sexually abused would usually suppress this trauma and then come up with stories such as supernatural forces. It's not their fault, it's just that the trauma was too much for them, and that's what they thought. But despite Doris's disturbing claims, Cary and Barry didn't think that this was a case for her. They suggested that Doris see a psychiatrist, which was quite a good advice at that time, because not a lot of people who believe in the other side also believe that counseling could help you. Doris was not ready to believe. She knew that what she had seen was real, and she continued to beg them, but they left, saying that she just needed help. It would be a few days later when Doris would call them again, saying that the condition had worsened. Now this time, over the call, Doris would go on to say that she was not the only one who had witnessed all this, but there were more people. At first, Barry and Cary were skeptical, but since there were other witnesses who had seen this, they decided to investigate further. When they arrived at Doris's house, they found neighbors and friends gathered outside. The witnesses said that they saw strange lights around Doris's house that disappeared into the darkness. Some even saw humanoid shapes out of the corner of their eyes, which vanished as soon as they looked at them. There was also this terrible stench, like decaying human flesh, which seemed to come from within Doris's house. Despite their skepticism, Barry and Carrie decided to check the house again. At first, everything seemed normal until they entered Doris's bedroom, which was freezing cold, despite it being a hot summer day in California. Their thermometer showed a normal temperature, even though everyone could feel the cold. As they continued the investigation, they noticed the same wild stench described by the other witnesses. It came and went in waves, and they couldn't pinpoint the source. They couldn't just point at one place and say, "This is where the stench was coming from." They returned to the kitchen to question Doris further, and that's when they suddenly witnessed the kitchen cabinet swinging open and a frying pan lifted into the air before it landed in the middle of the floor. Trying to remain calm, they searched for any logical explanation, like maybe there was a wire or a spring. Something must have let that happen. But nothing. While searching the kitchen, Doris told them that she could sense the spirit nearby. Her fear was in her face. Following their lead, Carrie took pictures wherever Doris pointed. He was using his film camera. Strangely, when Doris said that the spirit was present, the pictures came distorted. But when she said that the spirit was gone, the picture would come clear and normal. And this was not a one-time thing. They tried it multiple times. Every time Doris would say, "The spirit is here," the picture would not be clear. And as soon as the spirit was gone, the picture would come clear. Convinced that something paranormal was happening, Barry and Carrie decided to spend the next few days thoroughly investigating the house to make sure that what Doris was telling was the truth. As the paranormal investigators got deeper into her case, things became even more scarier. They began to notice small trails of plasma-like lights, and these lights would go all through the hallways and bedrooms, particularly in Doris's bedroom. These bright, scorching lights would go zigzag all through the house, and they would disappear within seconds. At first, the investigators thought that the light might be reflections of sunlight, so they decided to close all the curtains and even barricaded the windows to make sure no natural light would enter the room. They even bolted the barricades to the window frames. Once the room was completely dark, the light grew even brighter. These plasma-like lights had a greenish-yellow glow, and they were about the size of a fist, and they moved fast across the room. The investigators managed to capture some decent picture of these lights. To better track the lights, they covered the bedroom walls with black poster boards. Each of them were marked with magnetic orientations. There was this one photo taken where Doris was on the bed and she was bending forward and trying to cover her head as there was an arc of light over her. Now that light, astonishingly, looked as if it was right in the air. It was not touching any wall, it was not touching anything, it was just on top of her, like a rainbow. Even where the walls met at a 90-degree angle, the light didn't bend. It was floating above her. Later on in the episode, I'll go through all about the light. But right now, we just have to know that it seemed as if the light was bending on top of her and was not touching the walls. After seeing this, Barry was convinced that something paranormal was happening in Doris's house. A few days later, Doris was alone in her bedroom when she saw the lights. As these small orbs gathered, they began forming the shape of a human being, that is, a human head and a torso. Though it was hard to see clearly, it looked like the figure was moving, gesturing as if talking before the orbs disappeared. Unfortunately, none of the pictures of the man that Doris saw turned out to be clear. Now there are photos of the ark, There are no photos of this entity or this humanoid figure or whatever you want to call. If you're listening to this on YouTube or Spotify, I'll put the images on the screen. But if you're listening to this on any audio-only platform, I'll link the images in the description and you can always check them out. Now, the only conclusion that the investigators could come up with is that this was a hallucination. But how could so many people have the same hallucination at the same time? That's impossible. With all this happening, to this day, they still don't have an idea what those orbs meant, what was that creature, and what was it doing there. The investigators had each visitor in the house keep notes on their experiences. After reviewing the notes, they realized that nearly 25 people had experienced the exact same thing. Even though Barry and Carrie were experts in the paranormal field, they had never seen anything like this. None of the poltergeists they had ever investigated had this green plasma-like light. And none of those green plasma lights were flying around. This was the first experience that they had. And they had no clue how to deal with it. A few days later, Barry's phone rang in the middle of the night. It was Doris, screaming in hysterics. Barry couldn't understand what she was saying and told her to calm down. Doris explained that the bolts that they had used to barricade her windows had been ripped off. As she was walking into a bedroom, the bolts shot out of the window frames and almost hit her. The investigators initially thought that Doris might have torn down the barricades herself, but she was a small woman and she would never be able to do that. And of course, she didn't have the strength to do it. Desperate for help, Doris begged the investigators to return to her home. Barry and Carrie picked up their equipment, including a high-speed film camera, and returned to the house. As soon as they walked through the front door, bright glowing orbs flew through the air, surrounding the investigators, Doris, and a few other friends. The investigators immediately got out their equipment, but they couldn't read anything. The orbs were visible, but there was no reading. The house was surrounded by this horrid stench, and they had no idea where it was coming from. While doing their research, they noticed that playing certain music intensified the manifestations. They called out to the spirit, asking it to rip something off the wall if it could hear them. Right after that, they heard a tearing sound and a black metal bolt flew across the room, striking Doris in the head. A loud thud rang out as it made contact with her skull. The investigators ran over to check on Doris. Fortunately, she was fine, with only a bump on her head. Another bolt came undone from a nearby window and landed at Doris's feet. The investigator noticed that in a room full of people, Doris was the only target. And that's when they realized that Doris was the only one that the entity wanted. As they realized this, an old fuse box attached to the wall near Doris began shaking. It tore itself off the wall and swung towards her head, but missed. By this point, there was no doubt that something paranormal was trying to harm only Doris. Barry explained that sometimes a house is haunted by a ghost that is trapped there after their traumatic death. But in most cases, they are all poltergeists. Now, poltergeist in German means noisy ghost. So basically it's someone who wreaks havoc, disturbs everyone, tries to create chaos, but is not dangerous. Poltergeists usually target one person, and in this case, if it was really a poltergeist, then Doris was the target. Doris's teenage son had also told the investigators that he had watched as his mother was attacked by nothing, and when he tried to help her, he was thrown across the room. As the investigation continued, they noticed that Doris's drinking problem worsened. Whenever the investigators were with Doris, she often had a beer in her hand. Strangely enough, the paranormal activity seemed to happen more after she drank. It was as if the more that Doris drank, the more activity that would happen. Maybe that's why Doris didn't want to answer questions in the beginning. Maybe she knew that her drinking was somehow connected to this entity. After about 10 weeks of investigating, the activity began to die down. Carrie and Barry brought in a few more associates who tried to contact with the spirit or even witness some of the events. On some nights, nothing happened at all and the house was peaceful. On other nights, objects would soar across the rooms and invisible entities tried to assault Doris. Mostly, all these activities were reducing over the period of time. After the long 10 weeks, Doris finally packed up her things and moved out of the home. She had saved enough money to move to Carson, California, about a half-hour drive from south of Culver City. She tried to put the entire thing behind her and move on. She wanted to disconnect from the investigators, from anyone in her past life. But they found her a few weeks later. Now, she didn't want to connect with the investigators. Even though the investigators had helped her, Doris didn't want to bring them in to her new life. But they somehow found her. They begged her to let them continue investigating. Now, Doris was in a new neighborhood. She had started a new life and it didn't seem like she was having any trouble. She didn't want her neighbors to know about the entity because she had just started a brand new life. And so she begged these investigators to keep a low profile. Sure enough, the poltergeist activity followed her to a new home. Over the next few weeks, pots and pans flew across the kitchen. Doors opened and closed on their own, and appliances turned on and off without anyone touching them. It was the same thing that she had experienced in her old house. But this time, Doris didn't want anyone to know. Last time she had called everyone to her house, but this time she wanted it all to be quiet. She was tired of people thinking that she was crazy. So the investigators came back, and this time they packed all their gear into briefcases so that no neighbor could see what they were bringing into the house. They set up audio tapes and microphones in the living room and bedroom. One day, a vase flew off the mantel and shattered on the floor in front of them. When they listened back to the audio tape from that day, they could hear the sound of deep breathing close to one of the microphones. As the breathing faded, they could hear a footstep on the hard floor, a dragging noise, another footstep, and another dragging noise, like the spirit was limping around the house or dragging something along the floor. Since the spirit clearly followed her to a new house, the investigators decided to conduct similar experiments to the one that they had done before. They put up blackboards on Doris's bedroom walls and duct taped the edges. They hoped to witness those strange orbs again. After they set up the boards, they watched as some invisible force began peeling the duct tape off the walls. Once the duct tape was removed, the blackboard flew towards Doris. Excited, Carrie then told the spirit to do it again. He wanted the spirit to prove itself. And even though Doris was suffering, another board came flying towards her. And while she could not take this anymore, Carrie was getting more and more excited. He was happy that he was finally witnessing something. But Doris had it enough. She felt like a lab rat for Barry and Carrie. Doris moved again, this time to San Bernardino. Supposedly, the same paranormal activity followed her there. Toilets mysteriously flushed and objects moved around the house. It wasn't long until she decided to move out of California itself. Rumors spread that she had been impregnated by one of the ghosts, but others would say that it was just one of her boyfriends. That seemed more likely. It was probably this type of gossip that she was trying to avoid. After all this, the investigators lost all contact with her. An author named Frank DeFelita was finishing writing a book on Doris called The Entity. He was a firm believer that what Doris wanted to tell the world was the truth. He reached out to Carrie and Barry for the last few chapters and asked them what they would do if they could meet Doris one more time. Barry said if he could have a chance with Doris once again, he would take her and make her an actual lab rat. By that I mean he wanted her to take to a laboratory or a sealed facility, and then he wanted to turn it into an exact replica of Doris's house and then check out whether this entity would be behind her or no. This was exactly what Doris was trying to escape. After Frank finished writing the book on Doris's case, titled The Entity, he sold the rights to 20th Century Fox. The story was later turned into a fictional movie released in 1982, also called The Entity. Barry and Carrie were hired as technical advisors for the film and were happy with the results. Nearly a decade had passed since the first haunting began when the movie was released. During this time, the investigators finally came in contact with Doris again. She attended one of the screenings of the film and said that she liked it. She said that she was no longer worried and she wanted to lie low and she didn't want anyone to know who she was. Barry hoped that Doris had found some kind of a closure with this whole process, despite the fear and anxiety and everything that she had endured. From their interaction, it seemed as if Doris was happy. After seeing her for the last time, Doris went back to her home in Texas and she lived a quiet life. Doris later died in 1995 from respiratory failure at the age of 58. But her story lives on. Even today, we are here talking about her story and what happened to her. Ever since Doris's death, her son Brian has also opened up about his mother's drinking and substance abuse problem. He said that she dabbled in the occult lifestyle, which may have opened her up to the hauntings. Brian mentioned that all the kids in the house had also been attacked by paranormal creatures. Sometimes the spirits were detailed, but other times it was all very foggy and they couldn't figure out who was it. Growing up in a household filled with paranormal violence was rough, but there was no doubt in Brian's mind that the spirits were real. To this day, there are still aspects of Doris's haunting that can't be proved. Investigators like Barry can only follow hard evidence, and he is a firm believer that whatever happened was real. In the case of Doris Bither, they had several photographs, dozens of witnesses. They themselves experienced all these things. So they believe that whatever Doris was saying was the truth. He believes that one day science will be able to prove that the paranormal exists. Now these are the main theories surrounding Doris's story. The first is that Doris played around with the occult and maybe she accidentally opened up a portal which caused the spirits to come to the real world. The second theory is that Doris is some sort of a magnet and that's why spirits were attaching themselves to her. The third theory says that Doris had such a traumatic experience that maybe that's why, because there are some spirits that attach themselves to when you undergo a traumatic incident. And the final theory says that maybe someone cast a spell or a curse on Doris. Now remember, in the beginning of the episode, I said that there was a woman who came to meet Doris and told her to get out of the house. So there is this theory going around that maybe she cast a spell on Doris. Now I'm not the one who's saying this, but these are some of the theories that I found online. Now there is a huge article online. I have linked it in the description. You can read it, but this is what I got from it. I'm just going to summarize it. You can read the entire article online because it gives you a detailed idea into why Doris was not haunted and that maybe all of this was a hoax. Let's get into it. So starting with, we get to the photographs. Now it is said that at that time, I'm not going to go too deep into the type of cameras they used, but just remember this was way back. The cameras were not that great and we don't know in what lighting, what quality of photographs were there. Of course, at that time, you didn't have a studio setup. They just had their camera with them, they took it there and they clicked the photos. It is said that maybe because of the camera, the quality was not good, and so the images appeared like that, as if it was a poltergeist. Now, at one point, the duo does say that they overexposed. Now, of course, at that time, you didn't have digital photos. You had to go and manually get your photos out. Digital cameras are something recent, just a few years back. But before that, you had to physically get your photos prepared. And it is said that the team overexposed some of the photos, because of which they got destroyed. And so a huge amount of evidence got destroyed. The huge overexposure was done during the second visit and not the first visit. Now, in the episode, I had said that there was this one photo where there was an arc of light, that is the light on top of Doris Pither, where Doris was actually cowering or bending while the arc was bending on top of her. What Barry and Carrie had said was that Doris was cowering, she was bending, while the light was bending on top of her. That is, she was down and the light was on top of her and it was bending like an arc, like a rainbow. But if you see the actual image, you will see that the light was bending, but Doris was not bending. She was sitting. She was sitting as if she was kind of bored or just disinterested. She didn't seem scared in the photo. I'll link the article with the photos in the description, and you can clearly see that Doris is just sitting. She is not scared. She doesn't look like there is this arc of light on top of her and she's scared of it. Now, there are many theories regarding the photos and the lights itself. Again, talking about the arc of light, which I said was floating on top of her. It is said that maybe the free floating lights were moving too fast for the camera's set shutter speed, and that's why it seems like that. Again, you know the olden times cameras. They are not your digital cameras, they are not your mobile phones where you can just capture everything live. So maybe the light was moving at a different speed, and because of that, the image turned out to be that way. Also, another thing, if you notice, is that Doris is not the only one who's under the arc of light. There are other people also sitting there, and they are just sitting there. They are not cowering, they are not bending, they are just sitting there, and the arc of light is on top of them. So it kind of seems as if the light was just there, maybe because of a flash, maybe because of something else, but the light was just there, and it was not a poltergeist. Now, so the author of this article, Kenny Biddle, said that he kind of took a strand of hair and tried to keep it in front of the camera lens, and tried to take a photo, and the photo came as if there was something floating in the air. And this kind of brings me to the next point that is there in the article, which is, now remember, there were a lot of people over there, like there were 25 people over there. So what the article says is that maybe one or two strands of hair, like even one strand of hair, maybe it got attached to the camera lens, and that's why you could see that light, or it seems as if there is a light because of that one strand of hair. It could be anything. It could be hair, it could be fiber, it could be debris, it could be anything. And looking at this photo, it does seem like there is something floating, when in actual, the author just put a strand of hair in front of the camera lens and took a photo. Another point that is said is that during the film processing time, if you don't do it properly, that is, if you overexpose, underexpose, a lot of things could go wrong while you're processing the film, and during that time, if something went wrong, then that also could lead to, there being a flash of light, or there seems to be a flash of light. Reviewing this case nearly 40 years later, Benjamin Radford would say that this was just a distressed family, a poor investigation, and just bias. It's not an actual haunting, it's just bias. So what actually happened? The case was never completely investigated. Doris, first of all, was not too excited, even though she was the one who came to the investigators and asked them for help. She was not too keen on sharing a lot, And over a period of time, even though the investigators wanted to investigate this case, some people died, Doris kept moving, so many things happened, and at one point of time, Doris just stopped answering. So there was no way for them to have a complete investigation. Now, according to them, a complete investigation would be to recreate Doris's house, to make her like a lab rat, keep her in this confined space, and see whether the entity comes or not. Which Doris, of course, was not ready to do, which no one would be ready to do. So in that way, the case was never actually completed. From everything that has happened, we could only guess what could be the truth. If you just base it on what Doris said, testimonies of the 30 plus people that were in the house, what Doris's children went through, if you base it on all that, plus the orbs, the moving of items, things being thrown around, if you put all that together, it does seem like a haunting. But if you go into scientific detail and try to figure out how that light came, what happened, I don't think this case is properly solved. Camera tricks are easy to explain away, but what about what happened to those people who were in that house? Did they all experience the same thing at the same time, and was it all false? Did they all think that they experienced but they never actually experienced? Unfortunately, we would never know. But I would like to know from you all, what do you think? Do you think Doris Pither was actually haunted? A big thank you to all my fellow listeners who have been listening and supporting this episode. Your reviews, your listens mean a lot. If you love this episode, if you love the stories that I put out, then please do leave a rating on whichever podcasting platform you're listening from. It would really mean the world to me. Other than this, I also have a YouTube and an Instagram page. I'll link it in the description. Do check it out. I have different stories on Instagram, and I'm planning to put out some short horror stories on YouTube, so do subscribe to my YouTube channel and stay tuned. I am also an author, love fiction stories. If you want to check out my free fiction book, I'll link it in the description. I'll also link my other account in the description, where I talk about fiction writing, travel, and I also will soon start sharing fiction stories. So stay tuned. So do follow me there. Thank you so much for everything. That's all for this week. Stay kind, stay safe, and see you next week.